Now that we've completed Vivid Creations PCR for their mixing department, we've determined that $149,000 worth of costs need to be transferred over to the second phase of production, the molding department. When the units get transferred, we're ready to move on to the molding department's PCR. So we're going to start this PCR the same way that we started the mixing department's PCR, reviewing our information and completing the physical unit section. So for the molding department, I'll make this a little bit bigger so we can read it. That looks good. They had 2,000 units in beginning WIP when the period started, of which $40,000 in costs were already committed. They got transferred in by the mixing department. We had already added $12,000 worth of direct materials and $6,000 in conversion costs to that beginning WIP in this department, in the molding department, before December started, but we did not finish those units. During December, we transferred in another 4,000 units from the mixing department, which we go back to that PCR real fast, aligns with the same amount that got transferred out by the preceding department. And all in all, this department, the second phase of production, the molding department, transferred 5,000 units out of this department. Since this is the final phase of production, they get transferred to finished goods. The molding department has 1,000 units in its ending WIP when the period ends. 2 units during the period, $149,000 worth of cost got added because they were transferred in from the mixing department, which again jibes with the number that we just found down here that I have highlighted still. That was the amount that got transferred. The molding department, added $18,675 worth of material costs and $21,850 worth of conversion costs. The units in beginning WIP were done for transferred in costs. That's always going to be true because they wouldn't be in the second phase of production if they weren't complete for everything that happened before that in the production process. And for the costs unique to the molding department, we had added and finished these units in beginning WIP 80% of the way for materials and 50% of the way for conversion costs. The 1,000 units that are in ending WIP are again done for all transferred in costs because it's always going to be 100% for transferred in. And for the costs unique to the molding department, they're 75% done for materials and 60% done for conversion costs. So let's do our units section. How many units did we have in beginning WIP in this department? We had 2,000 units that were getting molded as the period began. We started in production another 4,000, the amount that got transferred in from the previous department. So that is a total of 6,000 batches worth of crayons that were in this department in the process of being molded into completed products during this month of December. Where did they end up at? Well, we transferred out some units, and those transfer units came from 2 sources. The first is that 2,000 units that got transferred, because we are a FIFO company, are assumed to come from beginning WIP. We transferred out a total of 5,000 units during the period, but we've already accounted for the 2,000 units that were in beginning WIP, which means if we transferred out 5,000 units in total, and we know that 2,000 of those were the ones that we're working on when the period began, the other 3,000 that got transferred must have been started and completed during the period. We have 1,000 batches worth of crayons getting molded when the period ended, 1,000 units in our ending WIP, and if we add those 3 numbers together, if we find the sum of those 3, that is 6,000. So we've accounted for all of the units that we need to account for. For the sake of doing some math over here, let's go through and figure out what our equivalent units are. So for beginning WIP, it is going to be your physical units times 1 minus the percent that they were already complete when the period began. So for our beginning WIP, we had 2,000 physical units times, in parentheses, 1 minus how complete beginning WIP was when the period started, which is 100% for transferred in costs. Close that parenthesis and hit enter, and that's 0, which again always makes sense. No cost needed to be added by the mixing department during this period, because if these units were here when the period started, they would have already been done for all of the mixing department's fun stuff that they do. For direct materials, we had 2,000 units in beginning WIP. If I multiply those 2,000 units by 1 minus the completion percentage, I'm going to get our equivalent units of production for beginning WIP, direct materials, and it's 400. And you can think about it this way. If they were 80% done, we had to finish them the other 20% of the way. And for the same amount of money that it took to put in that last 20% of materials into those 2,000 units, we could have made 400 units from start to finish. And I'll do the same process over here for our conversion costs. Physical units times 1 minus our beginning WIP percentage. We had to complete these 2,000 units the other half of the way for conversion costs, and for the same amount of money that it took to make 2,000 units half the way, we could have made 1,000 units from start to finish. For started and completed, it is always the same as physical units. Since these started from nothing and got finished all the way, their equivalent units has to be the same as the physical units. And then for our ending WIP, we take our physical units and we multiply them by the completion percentage. This is how partially done their end at the end of the period. Well, those 1,000 units, that are in ending WIP are 100% done for transferred in costs, so their equivalent units of production is going to be 1,000. These 1,000 units in ending WIP are 75% done for materials, and for the same cost that it took to make 1,000 units 75% of the way, we could have made 750 units from start to finish. And 1,000 physical units times 60% completion for conversion cost tells us that we could have made 600 units from start to finish for the same amount of conversion cost it took to finish 1,000 units 60% of the way. And then I can just add all of my columns across, and I get my equivalent units of production. For the total amount of transferred in costs that went into these units that we had during the period, we could have made 4,000 batches of crayons. For the amount of material costs that we incurred to finish beginning WIP and make 3,000 units from start to finish and partially complete units in ending WIP, we could have made 4,150 units from start to finish. And by that same logic, for conversion costs, our total equivalent units of production for that cost category are going to be 4,600.